All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll likely have some additional folks joining us as we proceed. My name is Johan Rempel, and I have the privilege of co-presenting today with John Tolles, who is on our ICT accessibility team. And the topic we're addressing today is disability awareness, legal landscape, and brief overview of WCAG, which is the acronym for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So we once again are having live captions for this training. Thanks again to Aidela for the live captions. I appreciate it. And for any of you providing trainings in the future, this is certainly a great way to provide additional accommodations for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing. Not only is it useful in real time, but the transcripts that are provided also can be of value, not only to someone who's deaf or hard of hearing, but for everybody. So there's two ways you can access the captions. The first is through the chat, the stream text link, which should be appearing in there momentarily. And that opens a third-party application that allows a person a little more flexibility when it comes to live captions, a little more customization. The second way is to access the closed captions option on the bottom right-hand corner. And the bright red arrow with the CC indicates that. And I just noticed a message in chat, so it looks like Adela pasted the stream text link into that. So some of you have attended previous trainings, so I won't go into a lot of detail about Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation here at Georgia Tech, but just some broad strokes because we are affiliated with a higher ed institution and it's one of our mandates. We have several research scientists on staff and really focusing on disability related topics. And then the unit that John and I work in primarily, we oversee a lot of digital accessibility initiatives and UX, user experience. We have an entire Braille department that provides services locally, nationally, internationally, at times, captioning and described audio services. Professional e-text producers. If you've attended any of the previous trainings, you've heard from Dr. Valerie Morrison, who's a manager of the e-text department. And then our Tools for Life team celebrating their 30 years as of 2021. So with that, I'll go ahead and have John Tolles introduce himself here, and then he can pass it back on to me.
Thanks, Johan. My name is John Tolles. I've been working at CIDI since 2016. Started off providing technical support for a research study that we were conducting, and I've since joined as a full employee, doing several things, customer support still. I'm also a developer for our student accommodation manager, and I work with Johan and the ICT department doing web accessibility evaluations, technical assistance and training for that as well.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And you all know me. You've likely heard me introduce myself. So very briefly, I oversee the ICT and UX unit. And really what we do is very much what we're offering here. Trainings. We also provide web accessibility and application evaluations, technical assistance, and then usability testing as well. So the goals for today's presentation, and we encourage you, whether you want to place it in the chat, any questions or comments you have, or if you want to raise your hand or let us know that you want an open mic, we're happy to provide that as well. But we encourage, if anything isn't clear or you have follow-up questions or comments, please please post them in the chat. We'll also try to leave some time at the end for Q&A as well. So the goals for today's presentation are to learn of the assistive technology solutions used by people with disabilities, very often referred to as AT. Learn about the national laws and requirements in place related to digital accessibility. Learn the basics of WCAG, stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, including the meaning of the POUR principles. And John Tolles is going to be getting into that a little more. Learn of the new success criteria that have been introduced with WCAG 2.1. So let's talk a little bit about accessibility itself. This is a fairly nebulous term that is used in many ways by many different people. And I just wanted to be clear how we are using the term accessibility, because there seems to be a lot of confusion. I've had customers tell me about, how accessible they are, and we're just speaking different language. So one of the definitions or ways of describing accessibility is capable of being reached. So it may have absolutely nothing to do with disabilities or accessibility from an approach that some of us may be thinking. Easy to speak to or deal with. Accessibility comes from the root word accessible. Is your boss accessible? Is your supervisor accessible? So just be conscious of how this term is used. Capable of being used or seen, capable of being influenced. This is how really we're referring to it. The term accessibility is easily used or accessed by people with disabilities. Simple as that. And then this, I really like this definition by Microsoft. Microsoft is, they are one of the largest tech companies in the world, and certainly they need to be practicing what they preach regarding accessibility, and they really have in recent years. They've really upped their game. So this comes straight from Microsoft. Accessibility occurs when environments, products, and services are designed in a way that people with disabilities can fully use them. Individuals are more empowered and productive in the workplace. Examples of accessibility range from a wheelchair ramp in a physical environment to closed captioning of presentations in a work environment. So really the built environment versus the virtual environment, or both. So people with disabilities, this is not a small segment of our population. Worldwide, we are looking at approximately 1 billion with a B people with disabilities. That's according to the World Health Organization. So that is a very large number. And in a moment, I'll talk a little bit about some statistics from the CDC as well. But how people with disabilities use the web, these are some broad categories that you can think of regarding web access. Valerie Morrison, in one of her previous presentations, emphasized that the work that she and her team do regarding e-text, accessible documents, the larger population is more the cognitive and learning disability population. The low vision and blind population gets a lot of visibility, partly because the National Federation for the Blind is so proactive and not shy at lawsuits. So when we think of making material accessible, it also is a higher bar for making materials accessible for someone who's blind. So very often when you meet that bar, you're meeting several other needs in other categories as well. So visual could be blind, it could be low vision. We may not think of this very often, but it could also mean color blindness. There's a higher percentage of males actually that experience color blindness than females, but it's a significant number. So auditory, anything related to speech output, video content, for instance. This webinar, we have, it is all audio, and one way to accommodate for that is the captions for someone who may be deaf or hard of hearing. Mobility, most of us use the keyboard or the computer in a traditional way with the keyboard and mouse, but there are many people in society who are unable to use that traditional keyboard or unable to have the fine motor skills to use that mouse. So making sure that material is accessible and content is accessible for that population is so important. You all may know Steve Hawken, the name. He controlled his computer simply by a muscle in his cheek. So that's near the end of his life. That was how he was functioning, and he was able to do a tremendous amount just with that. And we're going to go into a little more detail in future trainings on reaching this diverse population, and it maybe not being as daunting as you may initially think to make it as accessible as possible for all populations. And then, like I mentioned, cognitive and neurological. This is a very large part of our population, and a very much of a hidden segment of our population with hidden disabilities. And then speech. So we may not think of the ALEXAs of the world. I won't say it because I will have 3 devices talking to me, but that's really speech input and accessing the internet on a regular basis. So looking at alternatives to making that accessible as well. So living with a disability, according to the Center for Disease Control, 1 in 4 adults in the US are living with a disability that can affect their ability to see, to hear, to communicate, to reason, to walk, to perform other basic life functions. So that's approximately 25%. That's a very high number. And when we think about disabilities and accessibility, we really need to think of it from a more holistic standpoint. I've said this before that, you know, if you do not have a disability currently, if you live long enough, you will have a disability. Your vision will likely be compromised. Your hearing will be compromised. Maybe your mobility, your sense of touch, your memory, your cognition. So this really is on a continuum that, you know, as we progress throughout our life, we will have either a temporary or permanent disability, most likely. So we're not talking about a fragmented small part of our society. We are talking about the entire society at one point or another, basically. Assistive technology solutions, tools used by people with disabilities. So I'm going to go through a few tools here, and it certainly isn't necessary to test with all of these tools for accessibility. We'll be getting into that in another training, but it's important to realize how a lot of accessibility transfers over from one population to the other, from one assistive technology solution to the other. Here's one example, ClaroRead. It's a text-to-speech program. So some of you may be aware of screen reading programs like NVDA or JAWS or VoiceOver. Those are full-blown screen reader technologies. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about text-to-speech programs that are really designed for people who may have perfect vision, but can also benefit either from a dual modality standpoint of visual and auditory, or someone with cognitive or learning disabilities such as dyslexia, where that speech output is really going to be helpful. So this specific program provides visual highlighting, reads back any on-screen text and program commands, provides a high quality screen reader But again, this isn't a full-blown screen reader. For example, the dialog box that you see on the image to the right here, it's likely that's not all going to be voiced correctly or effectively for someone who's completely blind. I've seen some misconceptions about that as well, that one size fits all, and that's just not the case. This program provides keyboard echo as well to let you know which keys you're hitting, and then you can save to audio also. And here's another one that's similar. It's oops. I hope I didn't mess anything up on the screen. John, can you just verify, is the slide presenting all right with the read and write slide?
Yes.
All right. I need to step away from the keyboard because I just did some funky things on my end that almost messed it up. So again, this program provides text-to-speech software. Here, text read aloud. It looks up words in a dictionary or picture dictionary with a click. It writes with word prediction. It highlights and collects information from the web. These are all applications that John Tolles is very familiar with and assists some of our customers across the country with that we provide in our download assets to various institutions. But again, this is not necessarily geared toward individuals who are low vision or blind. Screen magnification programs. So some of these I use on a daily basis myself. There's the built-in screen magnification programs, but there's also third-party applications like Magic and Zoom Text that run on the Windows platform. There's the Windows magnifier that's built into the Microsoft operating system, and then its comparable partner there on the Apple platform for the Mac is Mac Zoom. And then both iOS and Android have some pretty powerful features when it comes to zoom and magnification. And they're simply called Zoom and Magnifier on those applications. So for testing, we do a lot of testing with screen reading technology. And it's worth mentioning that when you test with a screen reader for someone who's blind, as I mentioned earlier, the bar is pretty high, and when you do that, you're really making it a more robust environment or application or website for everyone across the board. And JAWS is still the most commonly used screen reader. It stands for Job Access with Speech. This is an application that John and I use all the time whenever we do testing. There's all kinds of automated testing tools and governing tools that you can incorporate into your website. But even those companies will acknowledge that they catch 30 at best 40% of the issues, and those automated tools and the AI still are not at the point where they can ensure full accessibility for the end user. NVDA, non-visual desktop access. This is a free screen reader, and in a future training, we're going to get into this a little bit more. Very commonly used screen reader. There's also Narrator. So JAWS and NVDA work on the Windows operating system. Narrator is the built-in screen reader. It has made progress, but it's not nearly as powerful as JAWS or NVDA. And then on the Mac side of it, you have VoiceOver as well. It's important to be aware that VoiceOver for the Mac is very, very different than VoiceOver for an iOS device like the iPhone or the iPad. They are named the same, they're all VoiceOver, but they do operate quite differently. So mainstream tech is assistive technology. We may not think of these products necessarily as assistive technology, but they certainly are. Dragon Naturally Speaking has been around a long time and has really improved as far as its speech to text accuracy. So it turns spoken words into text, it connects with the timing of your thoughts, and dictation speed can be up to 100 words per minute. And then, the basic tools that we often use on a daily basis, Siri, Google Now, Cortana within the Microsoft Windows application operating system. These all can be considered assistive technology tools. And then we have the text-to-speech / speech-to-text solutions that I mentioned earlier. These, our Tools for Life team at CIDI, they've actually worked with individuals who are in nursing homes who actually have been able to successfully move out of the nursing home, because now with devices like this, they can control their blinds, they can control their lights, their locks, their heating, their bed they're sleeping on, raising it, lowering it. This has been a game changer for so many people. But again, it requires speech to text. So if a person has difficulties articulating or voicing commands, having alternatives to these is also something to consider. And then, as I mentioned earlier, accessibility does not live in a bubble. Accessibility really benefits everyone across the board. And these are just some concrete examples. On the top left is a gentleman next to is presumably a very noisy train. He's trying to use his phone. So in noisy spaces, obviously text is a great way to communicate. The gentleman on the right hand top right, he's got his Bluetooth earpiece in, cup of coffee. I'm sure none of you ever do this, but multitasking like that. Think of someone who may not have full use of their hands, or their reach is compromised. Performing tasks like this on a daily basis benefits everybody. For example, making the touch points further lower on the screen, having those sort of accommodations. You may notice that with one of the latest iOS updates, they actually put the URL address in Safari at the bottom, which is really cool. I like that, and it just makes a lot more sense. It's easier to reach with your thumb than going to the top of the screen and typing it in, right? So those kind of changes that are good for the general population are also good for people with disabilities. You have the woman on the bottom left who's using a flip phone and is having some difficulties either seeing it or understanding it. So making it a little more understandable for anyone is going to be easier for the general population. And then the bottom right, we've all experienced this, using a smartphone on a bright sunny day. You think of the high contrast and how much we've talked about that, the tremendous value that this provides someone using a little 4-inch screen out on a sunny day. So there's all kinds of ways that accessibility improves lives for everybody. And then more than just phones and tablets, we have car interfaces. I was just reading the other day that now with I believe it's California is rolling out, the company called Cruise is rolling out their autonomous vehicles in off-peak hours. And the challenge with that is that it's not accessible either for people using wheelchairs or the deaf and hard of hearing population. So keeping that in mind, that these advancements really need to take into consideration the population as a whole. Home automation, wearables such as smartwatches or headborne devices, video game controllers. This is very different than when I was younger. Video game controllers are very powerful. They're very often used as web browsers and hotspots themselves. And then all kinds of emerging markets that may not even be on the radar for us at this point. So just thinking ahead as far as what what that means for people with disabilities. A little bit about the legal landscape. So some of this is probably somewhat familiar to many of you, but it's really important to understand some of the legislation that's in place now. Probably most of you have heard of some of the lawsuits, ADA lawsuits related to accessibility. It may surprise some of you that the ADA actually has very little in it specific to technology. The ADA was not intended by disability advocates or its framers to apply to information technology. Largely, this was because most information technology at the time was text-based and largely accessible. It was very, very basic. So we're really talking about the spirit of the ADA versus the letter of the law, because really the spirit of the ADA really talks a lot about accommodations, reasonable accommodations. So Title I of the ADA requires employers to make reasonable accommodations for job seekers with disabilities. I have so much respect for the original team who drafted the ADA, the legislative community, because it's a very robust set of legislation. It was signed into law back in 1990 by George H.W. Bush, and he, the last few years of his life were in a wheelchair. So he probably wasn't even aware as he signed that into law that this is a piece of legislation that would have applied to him directly. So under Title I, we also look at this as far as reasonable accommodations. This could include making online job applications and career websites accessible. Title II of the ADA, this requires that state and local governments provide program access for people with disabilities. So technically, state colleges and universities represent the state government as well. If state and local government websites are a quote unquote program, it could be argued that they would need to be accessible absent an undue burden. And a bit of an open interpretation there with undue burden, defining that. The Department of Justice excerpt from technical document entitled "Effective Communication." And this is what was written. The ADA requires that Title II entities, state and local governments, and Title III entities, which refers to business and nonprofit organizations that serve the public, communicate effectively with people who have communication disabilities. The goal is to ensure that communication with people with these disabilities is equally effective as communication with people without disabilities. So some powerful words there. They didn't carve out exactly whether this is WCAG 2.0, 2.1, but again, we're looking at the letter of the law, the spirit of the law, not necessarily the letter of the law. We're always going to find that the legal system is playing catch up, especially when it comes to technology. There's always a catch up game to that because of the rapidly changing technology. And then Title III, which I mentioned briefly, this prohibits discrimination on the basis of disabilities in places of public accommodations, commercial facilities, and private entities that offer certain examination and courses related to educational and occupational certification. Title III of the ADA states that places of public accommodation shall be accessible. A great deal of time and energy has been devoted to defining place. This is where it becomes gray, depending on the judge that this is put forth. Most of the lawsuits that you hear of in the news fall under this Title III. And then it's worth mentioning Section 504. This is a civil rights law, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is amended under the U.S. Department of Justice. And this really is specific to education programs and activities. The ICT refresh, ICT stands for Information and Communication Technology. So the US Access Board's final rule was published on January 18th, 2017. So often a lot of confusion here. When we talk about 508, 508 is really, really broad. It not only includes internet access, but it also includes hardware as well. So in 2017, the Section 508 was harmonized with WCAG 2.0. But again, that specifically refers to web content. So many in state and local governments have adopted the ICT refresh and or the WCAG standards as statutes, regulations, or policies. Whenever we work on digital content, this is our bottom basement level of compliance is WCAG 2.0. Really, if you're looking at anything else, you're doing a real injustice to looking at its compliance. And John's going to talk a little bit about 2.1 in a bit, but again, this is minimum compliance 2.0, and then level A and double A, which we'll get into in a bit. And with that, I will pass it on to John Tolles.
Thank you, Johan. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So WCAG 2.0 level A and double A. So the World Wide Web Consortium's Web Accessibility Initiative, or usually shortened to either W3C WAI, WAI, or just sometimes called just WAI, developed the Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, and WCAG 2.0 was published as the final W3C recommendation in December of 2008. WCAG 2.1 was just published June, I say just published, but it's 4 years ago now, in June 2018, and it incorporates WCAG 2.0 with updates related to mobile accessibility, people with low vision, and people with cognitive and learning disabilities. So we talk about the levels. There's 3 levels, and we'll go into a little more detail about that. But the main ones to worry about are level A and double A. Level A is essential requirements to meet. Otherwise, it would be impossible for someone in a protected group to be able to access the web content. Level double A are necessary requirements. Otherwise, some groups will find it difficult to access the web content. So if you're not meeting level A, it probably means your website is broken in some way and it's just completely inaccessible. But then if you're not meeting level double A, your content might still be accessible, but it's very difficult to access for someone using, especially for someone using assistive technology. We've got some logos on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side for the W3C, WCAG 2.0 and WCAG 2.1. You can go to the next slide. So the 3 levels of WCAG, talked a little bit about level A and double A already, but the additional level is level AAA, which is best practice. So it makes it easier for some groups to access web content. So it's like really going the extra mile and considering very specific needs when you're creating your content. Next slide. So the foundation of WCAG 2.0. So like I said earlier, is introduced in 2008, builds off the earlier standard, which was WCAG 1.0, and it's organized around 4 design principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Next slide. And there's a sort of breakdown of what that means. The 4 principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. There's an image on the screen of that. Next slide. So one of the main tools that we use is the WCAG Quick Reference Guide. There's a link to that on the screen at the bottom of the slide, and a screenshot of what the quick guide looks like. It's a customizable quick reference to WCAG requirements and techniques. So you can see the basic text of the guideline that you're looking at. Then the techniques and failures for it. You can hide and show different things depending on what you want to focus on while you're looking through the guide. Next slide. So WCAG, the first principle of WCAG is perception or perceivable. And some of the guidelines around that is 1.1 non-text content. So images, in order to be accessible for people who can't see those images, they have to have alternative, what we call alternative text or alt text. So it's basically a short description included in the image inside the content, or included in the coding for the image that gives a short description of the image. Another one is 2.1, time-based media. So it includes things like transcripts, captioning. They should be included, but they also have to be accurate, have to describe what either the action on the screen or have a direct translation of what or transcription of what the person who's talking, if it's a talking head video, is saying. And there's an image on the screen. These sort of like the way to think about perceivable. These are puzzle pieces that you sort of fit together to make everything accessible. You can go to the next slide. So continuing on with perceivable, another important guideline is 1.3 adaptable content. So when content changes especially based on the device that you're using, I think we've all had the experience of going to a website that looks pretty good on your computer or your laptop, and then when you look at it on your phone, you can't really tell what's going on the website anymore. So that is one of those things that will be covered under adaptable content. So like things like a logical reading order, heading content not marked up, distinguishable content. So having things like insufficient color contrast for text and links, especially like images of text. On the right-hand side, there's an image that's it's a zoomed in piece of graffiti. It would be, you can't really tell what the graffiti is supposed to be saying, even though that you can probably kind of tell that it is an actual word. That's because you're zoomed way in on the image. This is a situation that you would come in when you're using something like a magnifier to see the screen. You come across an image of text, you can't tell what it is because you're zoomed way in on it, and you're losing out on the content there. You can go to the next slide. So the next principle would be operable. And some of the important guidelines under that are 2.1 keyboard accessible. So things like hover menus, we also call them flyout menus, keyboard traps, mouse only elements. So anything in your content that a user is supposed to interact with needs to be interactable with both the keyboard and the mouse. So if you have flyout menus, when a user navigates to those flyout menus with the keyboard, they need to operate the same as if they had just hovered over it with the mouse. And keyboard traps means like you tab into a piece of content and then you can't get back out of it with your keyboard because it keeps cycling through more and more things like that. Some like Twitter feeds are really common for this, where you have a Twitter feed posted on your website. Somebody tabs into that and then they're just stuck forever going through all of your tweets. And then mouse only elements. That's really common for buttons, expect you to click on the button, not go to the button and activate it with the keyboard. So developers will a lot of time not think about that and just put in a code that only works with the mouse. 2.2 will be enough time. So things like, especially for like bank websites, financial websites, anything that's asking users for input, and then they're going to time out eventually. You need to warn them about the timeout and give them the option to extend time. Next slide. Continuing with operable. It's less of an issue now, but it used to be pretty bad on, if you remember the early web, that have a lot of flashing content, and that can trigger things like seizures. Even though it's not as common now, I think it really was because of some major issues, some major sort of media things that made people aware. Oh, you flashing content can cause seizures. I shouldn't put flashing content in my website anymore. But you still see it occasionally, and then you always want to be aware of anytime you have quick movement or anything like that on your website, it can trigger things like seizure or nausea. 2.4 will be navigable. So we talk about being able to get through all content with the keyboard. Having things in your content to make it easier to navigate, like skip the main content. Especially if you have a flyout menu, putting at the top of the screen a quick link to where you can jump past the menu and get directly into the content is always helpful, so that the user doesn't have to tab through every item in the menu. You also want to make sure that you have a visible focus indicator for any interactive elements. So that means buttons, menu items, things of that nature. You want to make sure that the user can see it when they're tabbing through the content, and that there's some indication around the element. This is the element that's been selected when they tab through. And then you want to have a logical focus order. This is common when there's things like side menus, different things like that on a web page. Instead of, like, if a user tabs through the navigation menu and then it all of a sudden goes to the bottom of the screen, because actually the side menu that normally is not accessed until you scroll to a certain point on the website is the next thing technically in the document of the website of the web page. So it jumps around, and that's really confusing. And there's an image of some tools on here. That's the way to sort of think about operable, is these are the tools you're giving your user to navigate your content and make sure it works. You can go to the next slide, John. So the next principle is understandable, so people can understand your content. You want to make sure that you include language attributes in your HTML code. So, like, just declaring this language is written in a particular, or this page is written in a particular language. That helps assistive technology use the correct language when the user is interacting with the page. You want to use predictable content. So, like, you don't want to have inconsistent navigation. You don't want content to change on input. It's just so users don't get confused and sort of work and not understand what's happening. So if you have your navigation menu at the top of your web page and you contain several web pages, if they go to another web page, it should still be at the top. Footer should always be at the bottom. Your side menu is always in the same place. That's so users can quickly navigate around and know where everything is. You don't want to have content change. So if you have automatically submitting things as soon as a user clicks on it, or having a side menu that you just select, or a drop down where you select something and then it automatically goes to that, especially for keyboard users. If that behavior just is not, means that it's not keyboard accessible, because as soon as you select the first thing, using your down arrow is going to jump to the new page, and they're not going to be able to get to anything towards the bottom of that drop down. Input assistant. So, like, you want to make sure that the users are putting in things correctly in forms, and those forms have visible labels. So if a user's filling out a form on your web page, and they're going to submit that form, and there's some required fields, you need to mark which fields are required. And when they try to submit the form without those fields filled in, you need to let them know. That's why the form submission failed and identify the fields that they need to fill out. That's sort of the logic behind the image here. Is an image of a woman with a map sort of looking around. That's like understanding the content is giving the user a map to your content. You can go to the next slide. The last principle is robust. So you want to make sure that your content is not going to break all the time. You know, it's unavoidable that sometimes it is going to break, but you want to make sure that you're following good coding practices. You know, not using always using complete start and end tags. You don't want to use things like duplicate IDs or duplicate attributes on the same element. You don't want to have inappropriate attributes or values for attributes. And so that's sort of like the image on the screen here is if you're a developer, you might be familiar a few years ago where they started a clean code campaign, and that's what robust is about. You want to have clean, well-written code that meets the HTML specification. That makes it much, much more accessible. You can go to the next slide, John. So some of the 2.1 updates, some new success criteria. We'll talk about those. They address things like mobile accessibility, users with low vision, and users with cognitive and learning disabilities. There's an image on the screen of everybody sitting around a picnic table with their phones out. Pretty common in my circle of friends. You can go to the next slide, John. So there's 17 new success criteria added under 2.1, and they were added under the same basic guidelines. There weren't any new guideline categories created. That has added new success criteria to the existing guidelines. And there's a list on the screen: adaptable, distinguishable keyboard access, enough time, seizures and physical reaction, input modalities, and compatible. That's sort of like the way to think about this isn't necessarily that these are brand new guidelines. It's an update to the existing 2.1. I think everybody's familiar. There's an image on the screen of the Windows update working. I think everybody's probably familiar with that from having to update their computers. You can go to the next slide, John. And that sort of that ends my part of the presentation. At least if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute or raise your hand or post them in the chat.
All right, thank you so much, John. I know we went through this material fairly quickly and we covered a whole lot of ground in a short amount of time. So let us know if you have any other questions regarding this. We have several trainings scheduled in addition to this that we're going to go into more detail on regarding testing, regarding screen readers. So just curious if anybody has any questions at this point, either regarding the legal landscape, WCAG requirements, assistive technology. Give people a moment here. And I'm just pulling up question. So Bernard said, lots of great information here. Will this be available to view later? Absolutely. I'm going to, all of these trainings are being recorded and they'll be sent to Christy as a MP4 video. The PowerPoint will be saved as an accessible PDF and will also be shared along with the full transcript regarding this entire presentation. And then the next question here from Jessica is, for the levels A, AA, and AAA, do you find that various organizations and agencies versus others comply with a lower versus higher level? Good question, Jessica. I'll answer this and I'll give John Tolles the opportunity to respond as well after I give my input. So we work closely with Georgia Technology Authority, GTA, here in Georgia, and I give them a lot of credit. They've gone with A and AA. That's kind of, like I said earlier, that's the bottom basement level compliance, but they've also incorporated AAA compliance. And in some aspects, specifically with some of their templates, their Drupal templates that they've pushed out, there's, I think, close to 80 agencies within Georgia, state agencies that use Drupal, that leverage these templates. And CIDI was involved with testing these to make sure they were as accessible as possible. And one of the things they did was they realized the importance of color contrast. Level AA requires a 4.5 to 1 ratio with regular text, regular being, less than 18-point font. I believe that's the criteria. So they went with, rather than 4.5 to 1 ratio, they increased that to 7.0 or higher, just because contrast is so important. So so definitely that's an area that they went over and above on. They're also, when we talk about level A, AA, AAA, there's also WCAG 2.0 and 2.1. To Georgia Technology Authority's credit, they're also moving toward compliance with 2.1. With the ICT refresh I mentioned earlier, it's not required from a federal standpoint, and it's all over the map as far as the lawsuits, but generally it's the bottom basement compliance level is WCAG 2.0 level A, AA, but there are a lot of agencies moving toward 2.1 as well. John, did you have any other experiences or thoughts you wanted to add?
Well, regarding just the levels, I'm not aware of any site that meets would meet AAA, but like with the Georgia Technology Authority, there's aspects where you can meet AAA, and most of the time it's not really that hard. As you get more familiar with WCAG, you may sort of understand that one of the drawbacks of WCAG is that they're never going to tell you not to do something. They're going to say that if you do this, then you need to take these points into consideration, and there are some alternate strategies for how to accomplish that. When they do that, it makes it sound really complicated, and that you have to put a lot of extra work in to meet AAA. But if you plan out your content very well and you understand what the spirit of the AAA guidelines are, it's actually not really that hard to meet AAA in a lot of different areas. Some things you will still have to put a lot of extra work into to make sure that you are meeting AAA, but some stuff it's much easier, especially with like the color contrast. If you just plan out well ahead of time and you understand that that's what you're going to go for, and you test along the way as you build out your website, you can meet AAA for color contrast, and you can meet AAA for things like your text under there's additional requirements for in the understandable section of WCAG to make sure that users can understand things like jargon and acronyms and things like that. And the way it's written in WCAG can make it sound like, oh, this is going to be really complicated to do that, and so you just ignore it altogether. But it's really not saying that you have to do these extra steps. You just have to make sure that the users understand the jargon and the acronyms and things like that you're using. And if you explain it in your content versus providing something like a glossary or a link to a definition or something like that, if you just include around when you make reference to something like like jargon or an acronym, if you just explain what it is in the text itself, that technically meets AAA requirement. So you don't have to go through the more complicated technical aspect. It's just the content itself.
Yeah, well said. Hopefully that was helpful, Jessica. I'll also add to what John is saying that, he and I, we test pretty much everything we test with assistive technology. So, WCAG, to some people, that's kind of the golden calf they bow down to, and it's so important. I can't emphasize it enough to if at all possible, you pull in the end user and get feedback from people who actually use assistive technology. And if you're not able to do that, we encourage at least have someone on your staff and hopefully multiple people to understand how assistive technology works and how this impacts the end user. Because you think of WCAG 2.0, that was harmonized with 508 back in 2017, but it was actually finalized as a final document or guideline by the World Wide Web Consortium back in 2009. So that is a very long time ago. If you think the Apple phone was only, the very first Apple phone was only pushed out in 2007. And here we have an incredibly robust set of standards rolled out in 2009, of which, you know, a lot of it is not necessarily taking into account some aspects related to other technologies. 2.1 has made strides toward that, but once again, these guidelines and standards are always playing catch up with the technology. So getting feedback from the end user is really essential. And just because you meet WCAG 2.0 or 2.1 does not mean you won't get complaints from individuals with disabilities, because there's those standards and guidelines, but then there's the experience of the end user that is really what matters at the end of the day. Great, I saw Jessica respond, yes, thank you. And Christy's asking, it seems like websites need to be updated, overhauled about every 4 or 5 years to stay current. To a layperson, not as someone responsible for this work, are you finding that organizations redeveloping websites in more recent years that they are seeking to reach, that they are seeking to reach the higher standards, AA, AAA? John, you want to address that?
So like when a website gets an update, it's very rarely because of accessibility. Most of the time they're updating because there's a new version of something on the back end that they have to redevelop for, a new version of HTML, things like that. There's not a lot of websites that are doing a complete overhaul so that they make them more accessible. That does happen, but it's not the main reason for it to happen. And when it does happen, a lot of companies who are like redoing their website, they'll include accessibility requirements in the new version of the website. And like I said earlier, I don't know of any website that's really striving to meet AAA. Most of them, usually it's WCAG 2.0 AA, and then I think probably some updates down the line for 2.1 at some point.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to add. I will say this, that John and I, we see this a whole lot, and to Christy's credit, she's really allowed us to be proactive with working with her and her team on as much as possible, get in there at the design stage. We see this a lot, that developers want to build out a site and then roll it out to us, and ta-da, now you can test it. Whether you're creating a document, whether you're creating a website or application, you really want to incorporate that design with accessibility in mind at the earliest stages possible, because those retrofits are always very time consuming and costly, and sometimes questionable as far as their ability to address a lot of the accessibility issues. So yeah, that's one thing we see time and time again. So if we're always excited when we can get in at the ground level and provide input early on, as that's where a lot of the accessibility can be integrated more effectively. Okay, Well, I'm not seeing any additional questions, and we're at 3 o'clock. I'm sure no one's going to complain about us wrapping up a little early. I will be sending these the recording and the PowerPoint and transcripts over to Christy, and she can disseminate them as she chooses. Well, thank you all for attending. We really value your time, especially on a Friday afternoon. So, and John, it was a pleasure again co-presenting with you. You did a great job. Thank you.
You as well. Thank you, Johan.
All right, excellent. Well, you all have a great weekend, and we will hopefully see you all again in the next training in 2 weeks. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.